I was sitting on a plastic chair outside the ADO bus terminal in Playa del Carmen. My debit card had just been declined for the third time. The screen kept flashing the same message: insufficient funds. I had $340,000 when I arrived in Mexico 4 years ago. Now I couldn't afford a bus ticket to the airport. My phone was dead. The charger was in my suitcase, which I'd left at a hostel I could no longer pay for. I was 66 years old, and I was stuck. Not lost, not confused, stuck. There's a difference. When you're lost, you can find your way. When you're stuck, there's nowhere left to go. 4 years earlier, everything made sense. I'd just finalized my divorce after 28 years of marriage. The house in Sacramento sold for enough to split down the middle. I got $210,000 from the sale, plus another $130,000 I'd saved from selling my printing business 2 years before that. Total, $340,000. At 62, that wasn't enough to retire comfortably in California. But I'd been reading about Mexico, the expat forums, the YouTube channels, the retirement blogs. Everyone said the same thing. Your money goes 3 times further. You can live like a king on $2,000 a month. I wasn't looking to live like a king. I just wanted peace. No more arguments about money. No more working weekends to keep a business afloat that barely broke even. No more pretending I had it all figured out when I clearly didn't. I booked a one-way ticket to Playa del Carmen in March 2018, sold my car, put everything else in storage, and left. The first 6 months were everything I'd hoped for. I rented a small apartment 3 blocks from the beach, $650 a month, furnished, air conditioning that actually worked. I spent my days walking along Quinta Avenida, eating fresh fish tacos for $3, drinking cold beer while watching the sunset. For the first time in decades, I felt light, like I'd put down a weight I'd been carrying so long. I forgot it was there. I met other American retirees. Most of them were older than me, living on Social Security and small pensions. They seemed happy, or at least content. We'd meet for coffee in the mornings, share tips about which grocery stores had the best prices, complain about the heat. It was simple. I liked simple, but I was also lonely. I didn't admit it to myself at first. I told myself I was fine alone, that I'd spent enough years in a bad marriage to appreciate solitude. But the truth was, I missed having someone to talk to, someone who actually wanted to listen. That's when I met Camila. It was November, about 8 months after I'd arrived. I was at a small cafe near my apartment, the kind of place locals went to, not tourists. She was behind the counter, making coffee. Late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair pulled back, bright smile, the kind of energy that made the whole room feel more awake. She spoke perfect English, which surprised me. I ordered a cappuccino. She asked where I was from. I told her California. She said she'd always wanted to visit San Francisco, see the Golden Gate Bridge. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. It was easy, natural. When I came back the next day, she remembered my order. That felt good. Over the next few weeks, I became a regular. Every morning, same time, same seat. Camilla and I would talk while she worked. She told me she'd studied hospitality management in Cancun, worked in hotels for a few years, but wanted to do something on her own. Her family was from a small town in Quintana Roo. She was the first in her family to go to university. She was proud of that. I could tell. I told her about my life, the divorce, the business I'd sold, the decision to start over in Mexico. She listened in a way most people don't, not just waiting for her turn to talk, but actually hearing what I was saying. It had been a long time since anyone listened to me like that. After about a month, she asked if I wanted to get dinner sometime. Not at the cafe, somewhere nice. I said yes before I even thought about it. We went to a small restaurant near the beach. She ordered in Spanish, translated the menu for me, laughed when I tried to pronounce the names of dishes. It felt easy, natural. I hadn't felt that way with someone in years, maybe ever. We talked about everything, her dreams of opening her own place, my years running a printing business, the mistakes we'd both made, the things we wanted to do differently. By the end of the night, I realized I was happy, not just content, actually happy. We started seeing each other regularly. Dinners, walks on the beach, weekend trips to Tulum and Cozumel. She never asked me for anything, never hinted at needing money. That mattered to me. After my divorce, I'd become sensitive to people who saw me as a wallet instead of a person. Camilla wasn't like that. She paid for dinners sometimes, insisted on splitting costs. She had her own life, her own money from working at the cafe and occasional freelance event planning. I remember one afternoon in particular. We were sitting at a beach bar in Tulum, watching the waves. She told me about her father, how he'd worked construction his entire life and never had anything to show for it, how she'd promised herself she'd build something different, something permanent. The way she talked about her dreams, it wasn't about money, it was about proving to herself and her family that she could create something that lasted. I understood that. I'd felt the same way when I started my printing business back in Sacramento. That need to build something with your own hands, to leave a mark. 6 months into our relationship, she told me about a property she'd been looking at. A small building near the beach, perfect location for a cafe or a small bar. The owner was selling it cheap because he needed cash fast. It needed renovation, but the bones were good. High ceilings, big windows, close to foot traffic. I could make this work, she said, showing me photos on her phone. But the banks here, they don't give loans to people like me. No collateral, no family property. Even with a good business plan, they say no. I asked how much. She said the building was $85,000. Renovation would be another $40,000 to $50,000. Call it $135,000 total. If I had that kind of money, she said I could build something real, something that lasts. I should have been more careful. I should have asked more questions. But I was 63 years old, lonely, and someone I cared about was asking me to believe in her, so I did. I told her I'd think about it, and I did think about it, for 3 days. I ran the numbers. I had $340,000 when I arrived. I'd spent about $60,000 in the first year and a half. That left me with $280,000. If I put in $135,000, I'd still have $145,000 left. And if the business worked, I'd have passive income, a stake in something real. I told Camila I'd do it, but I wanted to be a partner, 50-50 ownership. She agreed immediately. We met with a lawyer in Playa del Carmen. He drew up the paperwork. I wired $85,000 for the property purchase. The deed was put in both our names. Everything seemed legitimate. The renovation started in May 2019. Camila hired a contractor she knew, someone her cousin had worked with before. The contractor seemed professional, showed us plans, gave us a timeline. 12 weeks, he said. By August, we'd be open. But that timeline didn't hold. By week 6, the contractor said there were structural issues. The roof needed more work than expected. The plumbing was outdated. Everything cost more than the original estimate. I wired another $15,000, then another $12,000. Camila kept apologizing, saying she hadn't known the building was in such bad shape. The contractor kept finding new problems. By September, we'd spent $142,000. The place still wasn't done. I was starting to feel uneasy, but Camila reassured me. These things take time in Mexico, she said. The permits, the inspections, everything moves slower here. Be patient. I tried to be patient, but my savings were dropping faster than I'd planned. I was still paying rent on my apartment, still eating, still living. I'd budgeted $2,000 a month for living expenses, but with trips to check on the property, meals out with Camila, unexpected costs, I was spending closer to $3,500 a month. By December 2019, the renovation was finally done. The place looked beautiful, clean lines, modern fixtures, big windows that let in natural light. Camila had designed everything. She had a good eye. We hired 2 employees. Opened on New Year's Eve. The first night was packed. Tourists, locals, expats, everyone loved it. For 2 months it felt like we'd done something right. The cafe was making money. Not a lot, but enough to cover expenses and pay the staff. Camilla handled the day-to-day operations. I helped with inventory and bookkeeping. It felt good to be part of something again, to have a purpose. But then COVID hit. In March 2020, Mexico shut down. Tourism died overnight. The cafe closed. No customers. No income. But the expenses didn't stop. Rent on the property, utilities, salaries for the 2 employees. Camilla insisted we couldn't fire. I was covering all of it. $4,000 a month, sometimes $5,000. Camilla kept saying it was temporary. As soon as the pandemic ended, tourists would come back. We just had to survive until then. I wanted to believe her, so I kept paying. By September 2020, I'd spent another $35,000 keeping the business afloat. My savings were down to $88,000. I told Camila we needed to talk about closing the cafe until things got better. She didn't want to hear it. If we close, we lose everything, she said. All that work, all that money. We just need to hold on a little longer. I was exhausted. Financially, emotionally, I'd burned through over $250,000 in 2.5 years. I was 64 years old. My retirement plan was collapsing. I started lying awake at night, running the numbers over and over. At the rate I was spending, I had maybe 18 months before I'd be completely broke. No safety net, no backup plan. I'd sold everything back in California to come here. There was nothing left to liquidate. I thought about calling my daughter, asking if I could borrow money, but we hadn't spoken in over a year. She'd warned me about moving to Mexico, told me I was being reckless. I'd gotten defensive, told her I knew what I was doing. Now I couldn't face admitting she'd been right. In November 2020, Camila told me her mother was sick. Cancer. She needed treatment in Merida, but the family didn't have money for it. Camila asked if I could help. Just $8,000. Her voice was shaking when she asked. I'd never seen her like that. I said yes. I wired the money to her account. She thanked me, crying, said she'd pay me back as soon as the cafe reopened. I believed her. But I started noticing things. Small things. Camila was spending more time away from the cafe. When I asked where she'd been, her answers were vague. Family stuff, she'd say. Don't worry about it. I tried not to worry. But the worry was always there, sitting in the back of my mind, like a weight. In January 2021, I went to the cafe unannounced. It was supposed to be closed, but the door was unlocked. I walked in and found Camilla sitting at one of the tables with a man I didn't recognize. They were going through paperwork. When she saw me, her expression changed, just for a second. Then she smiled. "This is Marco," she said. "He's a potential investor. I'm showing him the business." I didn't understand. "We're partners," I said. "Why are you talking to investors without me?" She looked at Marco, then back at me. "We need to talk," she said. Marco left. Camila and I sat down. She told me the business was failing. Even after COVID restrictions lifted, tourists hadn't come back the way she'd hoped. We were losing money every month. She'd found an investor who wanted to buy my share. $30,000. I'd put in over $180,000. She was offering me $30,000. I said no. Absolutely not. She said it was the only option. If I didn't sell, we'd both lose everything. I went to a lawyer the next day, showed him the partnership agreement. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. This document isn't as strong as you think it is. He explained that the deed was in both our names, but Camila had structured the business entity in a way that gave her more control than I'd realized. The renovation expenses I'd paid weren't clearly documented as business investments. Legally, they could be argued as gifts. If I wanted to fight this in Mexican court, it would take years and cost more money than I had left. You can walk away with $30,000, he said, or you can fight and maybe get nothing. I took the $30,000, signed the papers, never saw Kamala again after that. By March 2021, I had $48,000 left. 3 years in Mexico, and I'd lost over $290,000. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was realizing how easily I'd been played, how lonely I'd been, how badly I'd wanted to believe that someone cared about me for reasons that had nothing to do with what I could provide. I tried to stretch what I had left, move to a cheaper apartment, cut my spending to $1,200 a month. But even at that rate, I knew I only had about 3 years before the money ran out. And then what? I started looking at flights back to the United States. But going back meant admitting failure, meant telling my ex-wife and my kids that I'd blown my retirement on a failed business and a woman who disappeared the moment the money dried up. I couldn't do it. Not yet. By August 2022, I was down to $22,000. I'd stopped going out, stopped seeing friends. I spent most of my time in my apartment, staring at spreadsheets, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. The heat was unbearable. The air conditioning in my cheap apartment barely worked. I needed to leave, but I'd waited too long. In November 2022, I checked my bank account and saw $6,400. I looked at flights to Sacramento. One-way tickets were $580, but I also needed money for a security deposit on an apartment, food, transportation. I didn't have family I could stay with. My ex-wife had remarried. My daughter wasn't speaking to me. I'd burned those bridges years ago. I stayed. By February 2023, I was down to $1,800. I moved into a hostel, $18 a night. Shared bathroom, bunk beds. I was 65 years old, sleeping in a room with backpackers in their 20s. I tried to find work, but who hires a 65-year-old American with no work visa and limited Spanish? I asked around at restaurants, hotels, construction sites. Nothing. By June 2023, I had $340 left. I stopped paying for the hostel, started sleeping in parks, on beaches. I kept my suitcase with me everywhere. Everything I owned was in that suitcase. My passport, my laptop, the printout of my bank statement showing how much I'd lost. And now, sitting outside this bus terminal, my card declining over and over, I finally understood I wasn't going home. There was no home to go back to. I'd gambled everything on a dream that someone else had sold me, and I'd lost. I sat there for 3 hours, watching buses come and go, watching people buy tickets, board buses, leave for somewhere else, anywhere else. Eventually, an older American man sat down next to me. He looked at my suitcase, at my face, and he knew. "You stuck too?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me a card. "Shelter in Cancun," he said. "They help people like us, Americans who can't get home. It's not much, but it's something." I took the card, thanked him. He got on a bus heading north. I stayed in my chair. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'll make it to that shelter. I don't know if I'll ever see California again. What I do know is that I came to Mexico with $340,000 and a plan for a peaceful retirement. And now, 4 years later, I'm sitting outside a bus terminal with nothing. I trusted someone. I wanted to believe I'd found something real, and that belief cost me everything.